Joining us for our webinar this afternoon. Joining me is my colleague Connor Smith of the Boss Group, and we're very excited to share with you our findings, our key takeaways and highlights from the 2015 In-House Creative Services Report. And if you're not familiar with my voice, it makes sense to say, hi, this is Jackie Schaefer. Last week we were at HAL Design Live, where we released the report and presented a very similar presentation to that audience, and everyone was really jazzed. We presented to a full room, so we hope you guys will enjoy the presentation just as much. And we'd like to point out that in addition to the Boss Group and Cella, InSource is also one of the publishers of this report. And we're really proud to announce this is our 5th year of publishing the report.
All right. So across the next 30 to 45 minutes, and if HAL is any benchmark, probably closer to 30, we're going to walk you through an overview of the report. We also have some new questions that we added this year, so we're going to introduce those. We think they're pretty exciting. I think the real rich information in the report comes from insights from the field, so to speak, from Jackie and myself, some things that we're seeing across the country from some of our customer base that validate some of the findings in the report. We'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have to support you and your team, and then we will answer questions as time allows. So let's go into some of the survey overview. As Jackie mentioned, this is the 5th year that we published the report, which has become, we're really every year become increasingly proud of this. The report has 64 pages this year and is the leading source of benchmarking information for the in-house creative community. In addition, the report features the largest sample size of creative teams of any benchmarking report available to our industry. So you're in the right spot at the right time. This is the report if you're looking for information on the in-house creative industry. We do get a lot of questions on this, so I'd like to take a minute or two explaining our survey group. Our 3 organizations, the Boss Group, Cella, and InSource, are very narrowly focused on serving the needs of in-house creatives. So therefore, our report is very narrowly focused on servicing the needs of in-house creatives. And question 1 asks the respondents if they work in an in-house creative department or agency. With all due respect and much love to our folks in the ad agency environment, this is all about the in-house group. So if this question is not selected, you're automatically disqualified from moving forward. The next question we ask is, what is your role? And we all know roles vary from department to department, and titles are certainly hard to get a grasp on. But we're certainly looking for people with the greatest titles, or I should say responsibilities, when it comes to in-depth insight into budgeting, staffing, technology, the plans for the group. So essentially, we're looking for those in leadership roles, and you can see that's represented there in the selections that we're looking for. During our survey analysis stage, we sort response data to eliminate any responses we may feel are duplicate from the same organization. As you'll see, we have continued strong participation. So back in 2011, when we launched the report, we had 158 brave souls who joined us on this journey, and we're up to 457. That's down about 1%, very slight. We even call that flat statistically almost. We only had 5 drop-offs. So seriously, what happened to the 5 of you who did make it this year? Hopefully, maybe next year you'll come back and we'll get that number even higher. But regardless, we think 457 respondents is a really strong sample size that cuts across industries, team size, funding models, and revenue bands. This allows us to collectively understand where industry standards lie, as well as when or what differences such industries, team size, funding models, and revenue bands matter. So we're really able to slice and dice the data in a lot of ways. And just a little hint on that, almost always revenue size and industry don't matter. In some areas, team size and funding models do. So certainly we'd be more than happy to answer questions about that. I joked about the 5 folks who weren't able to participate this year, but we do know that upwards of 50 new companies may be represented, and potentially 55 companies that participated in the past didn't have time this year. So a nice cycling in and out of different companies on a year-over-year basis. What we also know, this is not a pulse survey. This survey takes a significant amount of time and investment, and we know the product yields that, and you can see that having that many respondents, gives us a great amount of data. But it's no small task. It takes anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes, probably closer to 30 minutes to respond this. So we do personally thank everyone who took the time to respond, and hopefully you get really thanked by having an awesome report. Because the report does take a significant amount of time, we do consider that when we add new questions to the survey and what questions can be, quote unquote, retired. That did lead to a net growth of 8 new questions this year. We're going to work very hard on not increasing the survey length moving forward, but instead start to rotate questions in and out on an annual basis.
So with that said, we know you're probably going to want to sit down and read the report if you haven't already, page by page, all 64 pages. But we also know you'll want to find certain data points fast. So for those of you who have downloaded or will download the web version of the report, you'll see when you automatically open it up that the bookmarks are on the left-hand side, and those bookmarks are exactly the 10 major sections here that we use to help you find different pieces of data fast. So just like we did last year, let me just let you know what's in each of these sections. So starting with department organization, this is where you're going to find questions such as, what department does the team report to? Are they in marketing? Do they report in the communications? Are they in IT or finance? I've been in the latter two. We can talk about that another time. So where does the department report, and what does that mean? And then also things like, how many direct reports do managers have? Department funding has questions that you would anticipate, such as, what is your funding model? Are you chargeback? Are you a cost center? What types of rates do you have? But in addition, it also asks questions related to your training budget and how that matches to your staff size. One thing I found really uplifting and even better than the data showed us this year was the participation or attendance at HAL's conference. They had almost, I think it was a little bit more than a 20% increase of folks at the Chicago event last week, and it was their highest attended event ever. So that's got to be good news, because going to HAL, as we all know, it's not cheap when you put in the ticket price, the hotel and airfare, et cetera, for those of us who had to travel. In department resourcing, this is where I know one of the favorite questions for most people lie, and that's on team size. We also get into flexible staffing, so not just your full-time resources, but what about those folks who come on and off your team? Section 4 is about service offerings. That's where you're going to find questions on, and this again is one of the popular ones, but how many projects do you do annually? And this is the second year that we've reported it in the fashion that we have, and you're going to see it in there broken down by team size. So what do small teams do, mid-size, large teams, et cetera. And I always have to put a caveat out when we look at that data. And it's because, number of projects is really a loaded benchmark, because we all know creating a video project is not like creating a one-page merchandiser. It's not even apples to oranges. It's like apples to steak. It's so different. So keep in mind that should be taken with a grain of salt. That being said, we have identified some trends around team size and the average number of projects. Section 5 is around partnerships, and that's where you're going to find your relationships, or maybe your lack thereof, with agencies and production houses. In global operations, this section, we really got deep into this last year and continued this year, because while only 5% of creative teams are global, and 80% only have one location, managing a multi-location team and then adding global on top of it is really challenging. So we really get into the operations and technology support for that type of group. In processes, we talk about, do you use creative briefs, how often, what's your process documentation look like, do you survey your clients? We'll get into that in a little bit. Technology is probably my favorite section, because we live and die by the technology. We look at things as simply as, do you use Mac versus PC? And this one I was actually having a conversation on this morning, and it seems like it's pretty conclusive that most people use Mac, but the interesting thing is a number of people respond that it depends on role. So I think if you pull back that onion, the layers of that onion, what you're going to see there is that account managers, project managers are probably the folks who are given PCs, and the folks who are working in the Adobe Creative Suite are more likely to have the Macs. And then some people have both, and I think that's because sometimes company email or the intranet, or maybe when you're working on PowerPoint, you need to be on a PC. So while it seems like kind of a no-brainer that Macs are the obvious choice, it's not quite as strong as you might imagine. We ask questions on InDesign versus Core. What are you using a digital asset management system, project management system, and more. I think that values and challenges is pretty self-explanatory about what we ask here. And then lastly, in section 10, the creative leader job market, this is where we ask around job satisfaction of the folks who actually answered our survey, and also their confidence in the job market of changing roles. This year, we've included 5 articles in our perspectives from the field section. And I want to take a few minutes to highlight them because the content that was provided by these working creative leaders is really outstanding this year. And they're really easy to find in the report because, you know, one, they are all these full bleed Marsala pages, Pantone's color of the year, but also they're also called out in the bookmarks in the table of contents. So the first article that I want to point to, it was written by Amanda Furlick, my friend. She is from St. Gobain, and she wrote about the evolution of her team. And those of you who are lucky enough to go to HAL may have seen her presentation. Just fantastic story of what Amanda was able to do with that creative team that was about to be completely cut as an in-house agency, and now is the pillar of excellence at St. Gobain, to the point where they have a seat at the brand table in Paris, where the company headquarters are, and they're looked at for best practices. Next, Jeff Kortekamp from Wilson Sporting Goods. He had the challenge that many creative leaders have, and that's trying to fit what our creatives do into the evaluation form that's used for corporate performance reviews. He partnered with his HR department to develop some modifications that better allowed him to more accurately document and evaluate how his team members were performing. This next one by Ann Buse from AIG United Guarantee is one that you guys should asterisk. And not that they're all not fantastic, but this challenge of prioritization is a huge challenge. So what Ann did was she took a simple framework and worked with her team to develop it into a full-blown objective, and that's the key word there, objective prioritization approach for her department. Now, whenever projects come in, they're given a score and slotted into the queue appropriately and without that favoritism or subjectivity. And what's really cool is Ann provided us with some graphics that show the decision trees and other tools her team is using. So next, my friend John Briggs from AbbVie. So he and his team implemented a new workflow project management tool, and you know that is a huge undertaking. And they did a great job in selecting the tool. They did a great job in implementing it, and where they did a really fantastic job that often gets overlooked is that they made a huge change management process. So in his article, it talks about how they branded the tool as a team, the lunch and learns they went through, and origami cranes. I'm not going to tell you more about that, but you have to read the article to find out. And the last article is by Chris Moore of KPMG, and this is a very hot topic in the industry. And Chris speaks to metrics, how they're used in decision making, and as you can see in the title, measuring risk and reward. So once again, we've included an infographic that speaks to the report's highlights. From our website, creativeindustry.report.com, you can download this in 11:17 format if you wish to print it and display it in your office.
All right, well, let's get into the data. So this year we're excited to announce there's been a new focus on the video space, and it's certainly not a surprise to us that the prevalence of video services is on the rise in in-house groups. At the Boss Group, we're seeing increased requests for various roles that support the life cycle of video production. So for this reason, we added about a half dozen new questions to the survey that are solely focused on the video space. So as you can see here on this graph, more than half of the in-house groups now provide video production services. So The other 45% that currently aren't, I expect, and I think Jackie would agree with that, over the next couple of years, we're going to see that 55% number increase to a vast majority of the services. In-house groups are providing these services, I should say. Specifically, video editing and on-site videography are the top services that our in-house teams are providing, with almost 2/3 of in-house teams staffing video producers, though often these folks are hybrid roles, meaning they're responsible for shooting and also and/or post-production. We asked what type of cameras, so from a technology perspective, in-house groups are using. 87% are using digital SLR cameras, and as you would imagine, shooting in HD is certainly the norm. We asked what software teams were using to edit the video. Premiere and Final Cut Pro were the most prevalent, but please keep in mind with questions, with this question, respondents could select more than one response if that was applicable. So some teams may be using Premiere or Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro, depending on the need, or perhaps legacy issues, or who knows. Some groups could be using both. And lastly, we ask about content distribution. Not surprisingly, YouTube is #1 in terms of distributing video. It's also free. It's an easy way to get things out there. But I guess I was a little bit surprised. It's not an overwhelming majority. Web-based approval software is not that far behind, with FTP and a bunch of stuff in the other category, and even email, which is really surprising. I don't know how they're getting those files across their networks, but they are. So you'll see it's pretty closely bunched there, with YouTube winning the race, but there's some other mediums that are not too far behind.
Connor mentioned earlier on that team size was one of the drivers of operating differences in in-house groups, and this is one of the things here at Cella that we've qualitatively kind of known for a while, but we really wanted to get out there and get some quantitative data to support our hypothesis, because what we had typically seen was around a team size of 30 that the head of creative services role would split, and he or she would either focus on being a creative director or being the operational leader, and then they would hire someone to do the other piece of that job that would report to him or her. What we learned was that was definitely true. 70% of teams with 30 or more people were breaking them out. But what was surprising to us was that 44% of all teams were breaking them out. And when you look at the team size data, this means a significant number of teams, probably in that 11 to 30, the mid-sized teams right below when we start calling them large, are also doing this already. So I think that's a big shift in the industry that we're starting to see, an importance of folks who are dedicated to supporting team operations such as processes, technology, budgeting, SOPs, things like that, and someone else is owning the creative stewardship for the team. And I think it's a really good sign for the industry. We've long asked the question you see here on the left: do you use project management software? And as those of you who have heard me speak before know, I'm a huge proponent of project management software. I would not go into an in-house group and become their leader today. Well, one, I'm not looking for a job, but two, I wouldn't do it unless there was either a tool in place or budget and commitment to put one in place. So that's how strongly I feel about it, and many creative leaders, at least 56%, agree with me, and probably many more do, but haven't yet gotten the budgeting for it or haven't been able to make it a priority. The new piece of this question is the follow-up you see on the right, and that's if whether you have a dedicated resource managing that tool. And many people do. 15% have someone who is 100% dedicated, but then the other 56%, so gets us up to about 70% between the two, have a hybrid role. So what's probably the case here is a traffic manager or a project manager is also the tool administrator. And that's fine, because it might not be a full-time job for most groups, depending on how large your group is. The important thing is that someone is accountable for the tool's success. So we asked the same question in the DAM space. As you guys know, or hopefully have heard, the prevalence of DAM systems in the in-house creative industry has been growing across the past few years, and I would say that project management systems were, gosh, in the past 3 years just blowing up, and that became a major priority of every large creative team in the country that I spoke with. And DAM, if it's not there yet, it is next. So this is what, if it's not on your radar, you should be looking at. You can see almost as many people with project management systems have DAMs. We're looking at 52% say yes, they work within a digital asset management system. What's interesting here is whether they're enterprise-wide or one that's specifically for their team. And I'll tell you, my experience is that it is for their team if they beat IT to implementing it. If IT led the charge, that's why there's an enterprise one that exists, and therefore the creative team or marketing team has to subscribe to the enterprise one. So the tip here is if your organization doesn't have a DAM yet, beat your IT system, because if you're the ones who implement it first, you get what you need and best suits your business requirements. We asked the same follow-up question here around a dedicated resource to manage the DAM. And I might argue that for DAMs, it's even more important to have a dedicated resource, because if metadata tagging is not occurring and we're just throwing stuff up in that DAM, it's almost not helpful. So it's really important when you think about the cost of implementing a DAM. You're not just talking about, the sticker price to buy it, the cost to implement it, but also talking about the lifetime cost, having a body to support the DAM success. Otherwise, the money you put up in the front, as far as selecting it and implementing it, you might as well throw away. So let's move on to key insights. What are the things that really stood out to Connor and myself when we went through this report? The first one is the number of direct reports that some of you have is just, quite frankly, out of control. Specifically, if you're the senior most creative leader, so that's on the left-hand side, you can see that 21 plus 13, so 34% of you are managing 7 or more people. That is a lot of people, especially if those folks are in varying roles. If you've got 2 folks who are head of design teams, 1 person who's a traffic person, 2 people who had editorial, someone else who's in account management, etc. It's just a lot of different places you're being pulled. Now, the ideal kind of number of direct reports, has been said to be around 4 to 6. Because what this does is it allows you to really get some scale of your manager, so they're managing enough people. You don't need a ton of managers, hopefully. But also you're able to take advantage of their functional expertise and the other values they bring your organization. My hunch, by the way, is these folks who have 3 or less on the left side of this are in very small teams. Likewise, on the right, again, the folks who have less than 3, which is a large majority of those frontline or first managers, first-level managers, they're probably in the organizations or creative teams of 10 or less. It is a little bit of a better picture about those 7 or more direct reports for these managers. Only about 19% of you are managing that many, but that's a lot. It gets a little bit easier to manage bigger teams when you have everyone doing the same thing. They're all desktop publishers. They're all web designers, they're all editors, etc. But again, if those frontline managers are managing various different types of employees, it gets harder to do so, and you really want them to be in that 4 to 6 range. Also, that 4 to 6 range allows you to create a couple management positions, so there's upward mobility for folks, and scale. The next question, kind of well, no kidding is what we thought. Do you have enough time to provide your team coaching and development? Well, 72% of you have no time at all or not enough time. Well, sure, if you have 7 or more direct reports, there's no way you have enough time. So what I want you to kind of think about on this one is, what is your #1 job as a manager? And it's developing your people. Because if your folks aren't being developed, your team is not going to progress. If your team's not progressing, it's very difficult for you to progress. And who's going to backfill you when you're ready for your next role, etc. So you can't move forward unless your team's moving forward. It's a little bit selfish to say it that way. But at the end of the day, that's true. You've got to build your bench, and you've got to invest in your people. So think about your team size and whether that's what is inhibiting you, or prohibiting you, rather, from being able to coach and develop your team properly. This was a big change in the data, chargeback teams. So of the groups that are chargebacks, and it's a minority of in-house creative teams are chargeback organizations, but those that are, there was a significant shift this year. Last year, 3/4 of the groups were a subsidized chargeback. So what we mean by that is when you look at their total operating spend, all the money, the people, the benefits, training and education, travel and entertainment, keeping the lights on, the utility costs, all those things, 76% of them were subsidized. So they only had to recover a portion of those costs. That dropped to 59% this year, and more people pushed down into being full cost recovery and a profit requirement. There's probably many different reasons for this. The good news is, I mean, the cost of in-house groups is still significantly cheaper than external agencies. And, you know, hopefully still things such as quality, speed, and partnership levels are still being upheld. So with the requirement that you have to recover more dollars than in the past, you see chargeback rates are increasing this year. And not so much at the higher end of the scale, but really where the big difference was here at the top. The number of groups that were less than $65 have now kind of shifted some out of that first price range into the next one of 66 to 80. If you would ask the Cella team, you know, what's the average in-house chargeback rate across the country, we would say around $80. So still very competitive rate.
As Jackie mentioned, there continue to be a bunch of positive trends, attendance at HOW, and here's another, what we would say is a real positive trend for the in-house team. It's growing. Team size continues to be very positive news as a significant majority of teams either maintain their current size or were able to grow on a year-over-year basis. So I say congratulations. Obviously, our value proposition is being spread. The news is getting out there that in-house is a great way to go. These next couple slides, frankly, perplex me a little bit, and I'm going to share some insight on the next one, but we did see a decrease in flex staffing flexibility. So the question is are you able to use flexible staffing options such as freelancers or contract worker during periods of peak demand? And while 44% of you still said you could, and 46% of you said sometimes, that is down year over year, where the majority, 60% almost last year, definitely could. That down is pretty significantly considering some of the trends that we're hearing about team size and growth. And if you go on to the next slide, Jackie, I think it becomes even more perplexing. 62% of you indicated that you were given a decrease in dollars in terms, or were planning. So we're either mandated to spend less or you control your budget and you plan to spend less. And just frankly, that's not what we're seeing here at the Boss Group. We are actually increasing demand year over year. I also recently presented at the Staffing Industry Analyst Conference. They're projecting a 5%, and this is as recently as April, so this is updated data, 4 months into the year. They're projecting a 5% year-over-year increase in temp spend, which they do consider anything contingent, so that would be freelancers or contractors, year over year in the creative and marketing space. Now, that's a pretty broad definition. We all know creative and marketing is different, but still, they're projecting a 5% increase is where we're saying 62% decrease. So something's not in alignment there. Our direct reports are higher than ever. We do know that overtime isn't skyrocketing. That perhaps could be something that's lagging. We'll see next year whether that catches up. Our departments are growing, and we all know in many of the organizations, it's not exactly easy to get full-time headcount approved. Many times you got to kind of sign away your firstborn in order to get that rec approved. Now, I will say that we are seeing a very big increased demand at the Boss Group for full-time hiring, but we're not seeing this level of decrease in temp hiring either. So a little bit perplexing. I'll share an anecdotal story last week from HOW, where there was an awesome presentation from Alex Center, creative director at Coca-Cola, where the room was just jam-packed, and Ed Roberts introduced Alex and asked the room how many people were from the in-house industry, or in-house design managers, I should say, and the majority raised their hand, of course. But then the next question, he said, how many people in here are looking to hire? And pretty much the entire room raised their hand. So that's just like really good positive anecdotal information that supports it. So I came up with 4 things that I think could be driving this, and I encourage you to ask questions or challenge, because ultimately this is about us learning from you. Number 1 is perhaps we're not making a strong enough case from an ROI standpoint on using freelancers. So perhaps when you get this periods of peak demand, that you're being shut down in terms of getting extra bodies in the door, extra hands in the door to help you through that. And therefore, perhaps you're just somehow getting the work done or finding other ways to get the work done. I know this firsthand, that many times hiring managers are getting frustrated going through managed service providers or VMS systems and are finding other ways to get their work done. And for those of you not familiar with the term, many times there's systems or firms that come in and manage all of the contingent labor hiring or the flexible hiring for an entire organization, which there's some areas that completely makes sense, but it's very difficult to hire creatives many times through these providers or through these blinded systems. One of the things that just makes my ears perk up, and I hear this over and over, and I certainly heard it a lot last week in Chicago, many times hiring managers don't hire creatives at all by looking at their resume. The resume is the last thing they look at. Obviously, we look at work samples, we look at portfolios, we want to know the different brands that they work with, and then the resume is almost like a validator for that. Well, many times these systems don't allow you to look at samples in the way that you want to look at them, and you just get flooded with resumes, and perhaps that's discouraging you from hiring the freelancers that you need. There are other models that are going out there, and I say this from a sense of the Boss Group and Cella. We don't have horse in the race in any sense about how our clients utilize labor. We do what's best for them, so we provide everything from, you need a person for a couple hours to get the job done, to temp to hire, direct placement, and we also have managed in-house agency solutions, which are insourcing groups. We do know there's a prevalence of other models that are popping up due to some of the barriers that are being put in place in your ability to access talent. So work will find a way. We know groups are growing. We know the demand's increasing. We know you need the headcount, and perhaps you're getting roadblocks, so you're finding other ways to get it done. And then finally on this, we did have a gentleman approach the stage last week in the question and answer period, and he said technology, actually. He's had some roles where he's been able to utilize technology better this year than he had last year, where he's not needing to bring in an extra set of freelancers to get that work done. So maybe, like many industries in this country and throughout the world, technology is perhaps replacing some of the need for human freelancers. We'll see. Obviously, the conversation goes on. Again, not surprisingly, as I mentioned earlier, video is a growing service for in-house teams. As you can see here, the top 5 predicted growth areas, with the exception of infographics, are all in the digital new media space. So here's one that I know gets Jackie real fired up, so I'm going to speak about it on her behalf here. We're not surveying our clients. Over half of you are just not at all surveying your clients, and this just isn't good. How can you really know the best way to add new services and whether your clients are really valuing your services unless you survey them? Cella, we have a great tool called Partner Pulse, and you can certainly get in touch with Jackie, myself, or anyone on the Cella team to help if you want to learn more about that. But at the end of the day, while we'd love you to use our tool, we just want you to survey. There's also some other tools out there, such as SurveyMonkey or SharePoint Survey. Use one of them. Use Partner Pulse or use a different tool, but ask your clients for feedback. It will help your team develop at a much faster rate. And I get to end here from a data perspective on a very positive note. You guys are getting confident. I love it. And that is matching some of the confidence that we're seeing come out from the different labor statistics. Unemployment rate is being pushed down. New jobs created in April was really, really high. I just read a report yesterday in terms of home prices increasing, mostly driven by consumer confidence related to the job market. So you guys are, I love it. The trends are out there. We're seeing this firsthand. The demand for great in-house talent is, I would say, higher than it's been probably since 2007-8, before that nice little blip on the radar happened in 2009 to 2010. So congratulations. You should be confident, and let's keep that trend going. So just wanted to share with you some additional resources in the time we have remaining. First, the Boss Group. The Boss Group is an award-winning, we're proud to say, Diamond Award-winning, best of staffing, creative staffing firm for interactive, creative, and marketing talent. We've been doing this for the past 25 years. Our service and our quality has been validated by our customers, again, by winning Best of Staffing. We're the only creative staffing firm that can say for the 5 past years we've been selected as a Best of Staffing member, or award, I should say. So we're very proud of that. We do have a Creative Connects event happening tonight, so the timing's great. If you are in Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Dallas, Central New Jersey, Philadelphia, or DC, and you're looking to mingle and meet with other creative professionals, whether it be proofreaders all the way from information architects, perhaps some of those hot in-demand video folks will show up, please go to, you'll see the URL up there. You can also go to the Boss Group's website and check out the location. We're really pumped about that. And again, if the Boss Group can help you in any way, please feel free to reach out to me personally.
If you're not familiar with Cella, I'm sorry, and I hope you will become familiar with us. We offer an end-to-end suite of managed services, consulting, and training solutions. And as you know, we are the lead writers of this report and do the analysis of this report, so we love benchmarking. Just as Creative Connects is happening tonight, across the next 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be hosting Creative Execs, which is just for in-house creative leaders, and we're going to be talking about the topic that will resonate with you because of this report, right? We just said where all the growth is happening in the industry. So how are you delivering against that? How are you setting up your team? What services are you deciding to staff versus outsource, et cetera? That's what the communication or the conversation is going to be about. We'll be in New Jersey on Friday, but then later this month we'll be in Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, Philly, and DC. We still have a few seats available in Dallas, Philly, and DC, so you can see there at the bottom a website to sign up at to join us. Also, if you haven't taken a look at the Cella blog, please know you can hit up cellaconsulting.com/blog to see what we're writing. And if you want to get an automatic email to let you know what's new, you can just hit the subscribe here link, and each week when we publish, you'll be notified. Again, all the topics are completely germane and specific to the in-house creative leader position. The report is also published by our friends at InSource. InSource is a nonprofit organization who really is all about the networking of in-house creative leaders because they know, like Connor and I know, that some of the best learnings and advances that we can do, we can hear from our peers to hear how they've gone through that same challenge and succeeded. So now we're going to take your questions and hopefully provide you some answers. You can use the questions panel on the bottom of the screen that you have there. Let's see, we've got a couple. Let's see. The first question is, how many unique in-house agencies responded to the survey? That's a great question, and the number was 457 this year. And we are as certain as we can be that those are unique respondents. It is an anonymous survey. What we do is, some people do provide us their email addresses. If we see 2 email addresses from the same domain and we know them to be from the same creative group, we will usually pick one to move forward with, and we can go deeper into that if someone really wants to understand how we do that. We also take a look at IP addresses and other ways to try and make sure they're unique, but we can't be 100% certain, but we are very, we feel good about it.
And in addition to that, Jackie, not only do we have 457 total, we had over a quarter of the Fortune 500 in-house groups represented as well. So really awesome sampling size.
And very similar question that I think I responded to within that answer, but I want to just underscore it for Robin, that we did accept more than one response per company, specifically when we did realize there are multiple separate teams within an organization. In fact, one of the questions we ask at the end of the survey is the name of your in-house creative group, so that when we do see, like, for example, ABC Company, there's ABC Company production design team, and there might be ABC proposal design team. Okay. There's a question on centralized or decentralized creative teams, and we don't have, the exact question is looking for direction on team positioning and structure as standard in the industry. Currently, our team is a centralized creative team. We ask a question that you'll find in the report, I'm looking what page it is to help you with this, around, are there other creative teams in your company? And the truth is, a lot of in-house creative teams aren't the only ones, that there are pockets of creatives in other pieces of the organization. I think you'll find that, and I'll follow up, I think that you'll find that in our resourcing section. We are able to filter the results, and we do in a lot of our consulting engagements. This is in response to a question from Jeff. And we can do that by team size. We can do it by industry. Honestly, industry, usually there isn't enough data to give you direction. Team size tends to be the best way. Funding models also a really great way to approach it. And we'll follow up with you, Jeff, on how we might be able to make that available to you. Last year we did create this report and market them, and there may be a similar opportunity this year. Well, here's a great question from Donna. For those with a subsidized chargeback model, is there a percentage factor standard for determining how the cost of internal services should compare to external agency services? No, Donna, no, I'm sorry. There's nothing standard about the approach. In fact, if you looked in the funding models section on page, I'm going to have it here, 13, take a note, we asked, like, what type of cost are you usually asked to recover? And I would say that it's less about a percentage and more about, okay, you have to recover $1 million, or you have to recover $5 million, or maybe it's around you have to recover your personnel cost only, or all of these costs. So it's more around what cost you're being asked to recover or a target number versus how it might compete with an external agency. Ideally, the total cost to run the organization is cheaper than the external agency. It's just a matter of how much cheaper you want to advertise the cost to be in order to drive people to make the decision to use the in-house team versus the more expensive external.
I have a question here, Jackie, as well, that came through. It asks if we have any advice considering the 4 points of an in-house group that's been asked recently to go through an enterprise managed service provider. So perhaps they're making that switch and it's not going so well. Or perhaps you're recently and you don't know whether it's going to go so well. So first, I do want to say that we have many, many managed service provider partners that we do excellent business through. So my commentary is not a judgment on the whole industry. Unfortunately, there's some that don't work as well in the creative niche. If you're in that group that is using a managed service provider or a vendor management system and it's not working for you, a couple things that I would suggest doing, and myself or Jackie and our team here at Boss or Cella would be very willing to help you with this. First, well, I can't help you with this part, but I can recommend it, is you definitely have to make a friends with strategic sourcing or procurement. Build the relationship. It's a stressful time if they're implementing a new system, so start building that relationship, reach out, and realize that those relationships go a long way. I've seen it firsthand. From there is you do have to come prepared with data as to, many times the answer for creatives is we're just different and accept that. And frankly, some of our friends in these groups realize that we're different, maybe perhaps don't like that we're different and haven't yet accepted it, and there does need to be a justification from a standpoint of why you're not getting the labor that you need and how that is impacting your ability to service your internal customers. And a lot of times we know if work isn't getting done in-house, it's getting done, and perhaps it's getting done at a more expensive substitute, whether that be agencies or people, independent contractors. There could be compliance issues as well that you want to bring up. So the point is that work's getting done, and perhaps while some money is being squeezed through the VMS system, buckets of money are being poured by using outside agencies for work that could be done. And the more cost justification and ROI that you can bring to the table while building that relationship, we have many, many companies that were forced kind of to go in one direction that were able to make that case, and we're able to bring on companies like the Boss Group to get them the specialized talent that they need. So great question.
Felix had a great question as well. What are we able to find out which systems are the most prevalent for the project management systems? And yes, we have that on page 50 of the report. For folks who are purchasing off-the-shelf project management systems, Workfront, which you may know by its former name AtTask, Basecamp, and Workamajig were listed as the most popular options. I'm going to asterisk Basecamp, by the way, because I don't see that in order does the Cella team see that as a full creative project management workflow system? It's a kind of more of a component, whereas Workfront and Workmajig are more comprehensive solutions. For folks who are building their own homegrown solution, which is becoming far less popular, but folks who are doing that for one reason or another are building through FileMaker Pro, forced probably through SharePoint, or open source. Likewise, that same question could be asked about DAM systems, and the most popular there were Cumulus, Extensive Portfolio, Media Beacon, and Widen Media. A question was asked of how do you define a blended chargeback rate? So what we mean by that is there's one cost for all services or for most services. So you could either say, for example, video is $100 an hour, editing is $95, print design is $85, etc. Or you could say all services are $87. So blended would mean one rate. Maybe two, you could argue, but typically one rate. Donna had a good follow-up question on the freelance and temp resources. For those decreasing their spend, is it primarily because they have converted those resources to full-time or perm?
That could be number 5. Perhaps maybe their budget is smaller year over year, but I can go here again based on data from staffing industry analysts. Their full-time job is to analyze the staffing industry, ergo hence the name, and they're just not seeing that. They're seeing an increase, not a 62% decrease. Anecdotally, I'm in front of a lot of customers, talking to our sales and recruiting team as well. Certainly that's plausible, but I can tell you it's not what we're hearing. Teams are growing and there could be some conversions, but the work is also increasing. So if the work was just staying the same year over year, but we also know, and Jackie, I know you could validate this, projects, increase in project size are going up. There's more work flowing to in-house.
Yeah.
Therefore, teams are growing. So if the work was either staying flat or decreasing, that would make sense why that's going down, but the work is increasing.
And we have a question on page 22 that asks what percentage of your full-time members are FTEs of your company. If we would have seen a good shift in that data that would lean towards more full-time team members comprising the overall team, I think I could say yes, but the data is mostly flat there as well. All right, we have time for, we still have time for a few questions here. Holly and others, the report can be downloaded. I keep referencing page numbers from creativeindusтрyreport.com.
Also, if you are in one of our local markets, our retail markets throughout the country that I listed with Creative Connects, you can certainly call your account manager and we'd be more than happy to deliver one of the copies out to you.
Even better.
They're very beautifully designed.
Daniel had a question that I love. How can we get added to the survey list? I'm new. Just from participating in this webinar today, we should have your email address and we'll add you to next year's invitation to participate. If for some reason you don't get an email from us next January, please do come looking for us, but I'm sure we'll find you because we want as many people to do it as possible. Thank you for asking that, Daniel. What do most in-house groups call themselves? In-house creative group, internal agency, etc. from Jessica. This is a loaded question, Jessica. No. I did a pulse survey report, we call it, and this is just something that Cella sends out to probably 50 to 100 folks, small sample size to get quick responses to answer burning questions that we may have in our consulting engagements or otherwise. And one of the questions was around naming. One of the things that I can tell you, so there wasn't any kind of like conclusive, this is what folks are doing. What we did see, though, was a movement away from creative services as a title. So not necessarily saying agency as being the prevalent approach, but the word services being removed from the team names.
I have one here, Jackie, that's following up on a hiring question is, are you familiar with any third-party software packages to evaluate skills of creative talent? So let's take two perspectives on this. Jackie before Jackie
Okay.
joined us, as she has mentioned, and certainly if you know her, she has led in-house teams. So maybe I'll ask you, when I finish giving my answer, you could put on your hat of how you did it as an in-house leader. I can tell you from our perspective, and I certainly just want to share knowledge on what I know about what the Boss Group does and how we can help. We have our own proprietary assessments. I can tell you every single year we benchmark those assessments versus what is available externally. All of our assessments are project-based. We do have a full-time person on site, on our team, I should say, whose job is to evaluate our assessments versus the applicability in the marketplace, and they're all project-based. So it's very difficult, and that's labor-intensive and cost-intensive for us to do, but we feel it results in very high-quality talent. So there's certainly some assessments out there that are multiple choice driven that you can screen on some of the more common software packages out there. But I can tell you, and this is someone who tries every single year to benchmark our assessments, and if there's a more effective way to do this process, and we haven't found anything that truly evaluates on a project basis if someone is using the Adobe suite or developing web pages or editorial, from an editorial perspective, versus our assessments. I'm curious what you know, Jackie.
Yeah, it's funny because I was a Boss client in full discretion or full disclosure. Thank you so much.
Discretion is no longer. You just
I've given it away. We had our own testing internally. It was not as comprehensive as what I know the Boss Group testing to be now, but we didn't use any kind of third party. We developed our own. But when we did hire folks from Boss, they flew through our testing. When we hired folks off the street or from other agencies, we couldn't always be sure that was going to be the case. But I do think you can't just look at portfolios nowadays because folks, sometimes they're group projects, sometimes they are borrowed projects. I don't know if anyone else had the experience that I've had of interviewing, a couple different people across a week and seeing the same piece more than once. So really knowing what people's skills are behind the piece, both from a creative inspiration and creative direction point of view, as well as an execution, is really important.
Yep.
Let's see. I'm just looking through the question. There's a bunch more still.
While you're doing that, Jackie, I have one more here that came across. There wasn't a ton in the survey about different pockets of specifically using editorial talent. What are we seeing in the industry is our editorial groups growing, and editorial is so broad, so we'll say proofreading, editing, copywriting for this question. Are we seeing more freelance work there or full-time work? Kind of what are we seeing there? So I'll take a crack at that, and then we'll, Jackie, you'll add any other insights as well. We are absolutely seeing a growth in the editorial function, especially as it relates to expertise, whether it comes to medical editing, financial editing, medical writing, financial writing, certainly copywriting from a very creative perspective. Great copywriters are very much in demand. And we feel that those trends follow all the other trends, that there's certainly a full-time staff of these professionals on site, but they're being heavily augmented by freelance staff, and that's where that expertise comes in. If you land a big project or you want to try out a different type of writing style and perhaps market that to your in-house clients, a great way to do that is to get perhaps some skill sets from the outside in to do that.
I would say an area of growth that we have been recommending within our consulting engagements lately has been in proofreading. A lot of organizations don't have them, and some are skating by without having them and not having any major issues, and others are having some issues. So I think folks are starting to invest in proofreading more than they used to.
That's a great point. And having been in this industry now going on 13 plus years, and I mean the creative staffing industry specifically, living through a couple different economic cycles, with obviously the 2009 economic cycle being the deepest that I've experienced, the first thing to get really, really cut hard was the proofreading services. And I'm talking about, not necessarily your very specialized proofreading, but the person who just proofreads the piece before it goes out the door. That was one of the first skill sets to get hit really hard. And it's not surprising to hear Jackie say that. as in-house teams are growing, as they're having more cash to go to places like HOW, as we're having more resources available to us, it's not surprising at all to see, okay, yeah, proofreading should be back. And it's just not smart to have your designer proofing his or her own work. That's just not a best practice. So proofreading is a much needed skill. So I'm happy to hear that.
And even to underscore, it's not smart to have your copywriters proofreading their own work.
There you go. How about nobody should proofread their own work?
That sounds like the right answer. Here's a couple great ones in a row here. From Charlie, are you seeing more companies moving from external agencies to internal ones, and what business reasons are they giving for this? There was a lot of research published last year, I believe it was, by the ANA on this topic, and the answer is yes, we are seeing a good amount of companies move work from external agencies into internal ones. Obviously, one of the big drivers there is cost. Procurement is getting involved, and they're identifying that some of the work that's being done at some of these higher-end agencies is work that can be done or decoupled is kind of the term that's being used. So if you're spending $250, $300 an hour on work, or it's just being bundled into really big agency projects, if you split that out, you can bring it in-house and do some of that iterative work, which you might have heard us refer to as Tier 2 work, and certainly Tier 3 in-house. I'm not stating that in-house shouldn't be doing Tier 1. I'm a huge advocate of that. But certainly the bigger agencies shouldn't be, and the more expensive agencies, be doing some of that other work that in-house groups can do. So I would we can send out a link for information about that report following the webinar. Related question from Scott on the average blended rate for external agencies today. I just threw out a number 250, 300. Don't take that as the gospel, if you will. Instead, there's two really good resources out here to benchmark these, and a third one that you can find independently. So the third one I'll start with is working with your procurement team to understand rate cards and costs that agencies are charging your company, so very specific to your company. But if you don't have access to that information, or it's incredibly difficult to get, the 4 A's, AAAA.org, has a great report that you can purchase that has agency rates by market, by role, by service. And you can look down that to kind of figure out, hey, I live in New York City, and that's my competition, or I'm in the Midwest, and to figure out what type of rates you should be competing with. So here's one, Connor, I'm going to throw to you. What is definitive simple guideline? What is a simple definitive guideline for how to avoid the perma-temp employee misclassification problem when hiring is not an option?
Wow. So we're going to say when hiring full-time is not an option. So I'm going to assume at this point you cannot hire someone onto your headcount. Well, here's what I can tell you right off the bat. Using a firm like the Boss Group, or using the Boss Group, where we W-2 hourly our employees on a contract basis, provide them benefits, provide them, basically they're our employees, is the first thing I would recommend. And I'm answering your question directly. That puts, there's two companies there in play. That you're not employing that person directly, essentially paying them hourly when they maybe perhaps should be salaried doing the same job as the person sitting right next to them. So 100% the best way to avoid this is to get a third party involved. Outside of that, believe it or not, and we actually published a white paper on this not too long ago, I guess within the past 2 years it was,
yep, available on Cella's website.
Many times people think term limits are the way to avoid co-employment, and they're not. Actually, term limits are, I think, something that is an easy way for our compliance and our legal friends to get around this issue. But many times it's just simply the way that you are classifying the work in terms of the way that you're giving work direction to them. If you're essentially treating them like all other employees in the group, if you're inviting them to the same training sessions, the same parties. Essentially, if they start to look over a course of a long period of time, like they're essentially your employees, that can get you into hot water. And if that happens for a year or 5 years, that's where the hot water can come into. I certainly want to put an asterisk here. I'm not giving legal advice, but what the one just hard line in the sand that I can tell you the best way to avoid this is to utilize a third party so you're not employing that freelancer directly. Again, they're our employees when we employ these freelancers. That puts, the burden in terms of their employment and their management on us. You're just providing work direction from there.
So I think we'll just take one or two more questions here, and there's a lot of great ones here. As much as possible, we'll try and respond following the webinar. One I think it's important from Terry is I didn't mention many different project management systems as ones that were listed. And I just want to be clear, in mentioning the three that I did, it wasn't necessarily a endorsement of those three, just what was listed as most prevalent by survey respondents and what they're using. At Cella, we have ended up recommending many different ones. We don't think there is one solution that fits everyone, and there's lots of great resources available. If you're not familiar with other project management systems, we'll include a list where you can find a list of those on our website. And then here's a great one from Bob. Are you finding that creative departments have a hard time holding on to freelancers/contracted staff because the freelancer or contractors are looking for full-time gigs and are leaving when they find one?
First of all, hi, Bob. You're awesome. So I'm going to tell you flat out, it is difficult to hold on to full-time, freelance, everybody. Here's the reality of the marketplace as it exists in today's economy, that there are no guaranteed jobs. And it doesn't matter if you're a freelancer or it doesn't matter if you're full-time. Look at the trends. We had an awesome session with Simon Sinek last week. Look at how many layoffs occur every single week from big companies. So, I think what it comes down to is having the conversation with the talent and making sure that the work that they're doing at your company is engaging for them, that it's going to enhance their career, that it enhances their portfolio, that you're providing a workplace that they want to come to every day. And if that's the case, it really doesn't matter if you're providing a quote-unquote full-time job, and I'm using air quotes for that, or a freelance job, because we have freelancers that are on site for companies on average way longer than full-time employees are. That just depends how companies want to slice and dice their labor overhead headcounts. So I think it just is the conversation. I mean, we have engagements where the majority of the full-time staff are freelancers, and they've been there for a long time. But it's really the employers, and by employer, again, this is where using a third party, it's on them, and it's on you as the co-employer in the sense, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, not the legal sense of the word, as the person who's providing the work environment, the work product, the motivation, those different things. So I can tell you flat out, regardless of that stat that budgets are down according to the survey for hiring and retaining top creative talent right now is extremely challenging regardless of their employment classification.
So we'll answer one last question from Janelle. What is the highest blended chargeback rate from the study? You'll find this question answered in depth on page 14 in the report, but there are some groups whose chargeback rates reach as high as greater than $140 an hour, and that's really high. And just based on some of our consulting work, I'll share with you that groups who get that high start to lose business, and it is far more difficult for them to be successful using those rates because they become less competitive with external rates. So with that, we really want to thank you for your time. So many folks have stayed on for the full Q&A session. Don't forget, you can download the report if you haven't already from creativeindustry.report.com. The infographic is available too. Hopefully early next week, we should have this webinar posted to our website so you can share with your team or watch again if you'd like.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.